Okay, so today we're going to talk about 1-point linear perspective and 2-point linear perspective and how to recognize it, and then also how to figure out where the vanishing point is. So if you read the chapter, you know that scientific linear perspective was something that in some ways was done by the early Romans and then got lost for a while, and then it was rediscovered and codified by the Florentine sculptor and goldsmith Filippo Brunelleschi. And so this is a mathematically based technique used to create the illusion of realistic three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. So in real life, we know, like if you're driving in your car, the further away something is, the smaller it appears to be. So we're looking at, this is like, I believe this is in Florence, and we're looking at these apartment buildings that flank either side of this canal. And when they're closer to us, they appear taller and bigger, and then they gradually get smaller and smaller the further away they are in space. They don't get smaller and smaller, they appear to be smaller and smaller. And so then when we're looking at the Parthenon here, we're looking at it from an angle, we notice that the closer this is to us, the taller that column appears. And then as we move further away in space on the left, that last column appears a lot smaller. And as we move further away in space to the right, that last column appears a little smaller than the first one. The reason the one in the background appears really small is because it's much further away from us. So linear perspective, scientific linear perspective, gives us the ability to believably create the illusion of real three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. So when we talked about linear perspective in the chapter, we talked about 1-point linear perspective that has a single vanishing point, and 2-point linear perspective that has two vanishing points. In this case, there's a vanishing point somewhere off the image to the right, and there's a vanishing point somewhere off the image to the left. So we're going to talk about how to figure out or recognize if something's using 1-point linear perspective. So we're talking about version A. So version A is you, the viewer, you're facing this scene. And the front of buildings, these buildings in the background that we see, they're placed square in front of us. They're further away, but this is a straight line across. So they're placed square, the fronts of them are, and not at angles. And then the receding diagonal lines on the left converge upon a single vanishing point, and those on the right converge upon that same vanishing point somewhere in the distance. So let's kind of break this down more specifically. So when you're like trying to figure out where this vanishing point is, you're gonna look at the objects, and like here the road and the bridge in front of us and the side of that building over there, and you're gonna try to figure out, as they get smaller and further away from us and closer together, where's that vanishing point? So when you first start figuring this out, you're not going to go like, I'm going to make up some diagonal lines and just look up in the air and draw them wherever the hell I want to. We're not going to do that. You're only going to draw over existing lines, and then you're going to just extend them out into space on either side until they meet. So I'm like drawing along the edge of this railing of the bridge. See how that's a diagonal line? And I'm drawing until some other line I've drawn actually meets it. And then some other line, the edge of the road line I've drawn, actually meets those two lines. So this is where the vanishing point would be. I drew this line too long, it wouldn't be here because that line's not meeting those other diagonal lines. It would be wherever those diagonal lines converge upon one another and meet. So you're not making up lines. Like I could have drawn along this line that's under the bottom of the railing. That's a good line. I could have drawn along this shadow here because it goes straight back to that vantage point. That's a good line. So we'll break it down some more. So the building in the background, the front of that building faces us head on. It's further away, but it faces us head on. The diagonal lines on the left that run along the sidewalk and the edge of the road, those are like up here. See how wide it is up there? And like the further away they go toward that vanishing point, the closer those two diagonal lines are. They're getting closer and closer and closer together until they meet. And the diagonal lines on the right, along the railing, along the top of the bridge, they're further apart here, and they're getting closer and closer and closer together until they meet at the same point, until they converge and meet at the same point that those guys on the left met and converged upon. So when you're thinking about one-point perspective, the lines on the left and the lines on the right, in this case, they're angling so that they're getting closer and closer together and they're going to meet. They're moving toward one another. So there's another version of how you can do one-point perspective. So in this case, you're standing to one side of the image. You, the artist, is when they're figuring out how to create it. So they might be standing on the left, which in this case the artist is, or they may be standing on the right. But in this case, they're standing on the left. And the front of objects still faces, and the diagonal lines are all headed in the same direction. So they're gonna converge upon a single vanishing point. So let's look at it. So again, you're not gonna make up lines. You're not gonna just look in the air and say, that looks like a line. I'd like to put a line here. You're not gonna do that. You're gonna draw on already existing lines and extend them when necessary. So first, building faces us head on with all the front, all those horizontal lines in the front of that building are parallel to one another. So then here's all these diagonal lines. They're existing diagonals that run along the railroad track, that run along the edge of, I'm assuming this is like a road or like this one area that's got an edge to it. We're going to draw on those and draw on those and draw on those. And look at them. They're all like converging somewhere over to the right. They might go a little bit further. So the vanishing point might be located just off the edge of the picture. So all those diagonal lines, they start on the left and they move toward the right. Start on the left, move toward the right. So the railroad track's wider here. It's going to get closer. It appears smaller and smaller, further back in space it is. This little area where all this gravel and stuff is, wider here, gets closer together here. So in this next image, we're going to look at it where the artist was standing on the right when they made this, and the vanishing point will be somewhere on the left. So again, all the diagonal lines, look at all these diagonal lines. They're receding, receding. They're going from right to left. They're getting closer together as they move from right to left. And then their vanishing point is somewhere way off the image. So just bear in mind, it's not always going to be on the image. We don't see any diagonal lines that are going from left to right, do we? No. There's this one. Just ignore it. Most of them are all going from right to left. So this is like primarily drawn using 1-point perspective. So now we're going to look at something that uses 2-point perspective. Remember, you're not going to look in the air, or you're not going to say, I think a line goes here because it looks pretty. You're going to only draw over existing lines. So always with 2-point linear perspective, remember, you're going to look for the corners that are closest to us. So this corner here is kind of jutting out. It's closest to us. This corner of this barn here is closest to us. It's jutting out. And then the two sides are moving away from us in space to the left and to the right, to the left and to the right. So you're always going to look for those vertical corners, which I've drawn in orange on this image. Then you're going to look for diagonal lines on the left side of that corner and the right side of those corners. And those diagonal lines, one set of them runs along the length of the object, and one set of them runs along the width of the object. This would be the length of this barn here, and this would be the width of this barn here. I'm only drawing on one of these because otherwise you're going to be like, there's too many lines. Okay, so now I wanted to point this out. The front of the buildings, they're presented at angles. They're not presented straight on where we see the front of the building like straight on in front of us. They're at angles. So that's another key. It's 2-point linear perspective. So we're going to look at the lines that run along the length of that barn. They're wider here. They're more narrow here. So they're like I drew along those existing lines, but I'm just going to keep them extending them, and really, truth be told, I need a larger slide because that vanishing point is somewhere way off to the left of my PowerPoint slide. So just remember, it's not always in the picture. So now we're going to go along the width of the building. So these are the lines that run along the width and that go from left to right. And they're wider here and they get closer, a little bit closer here. And then as they move toward the right, they're going to get closer and closer and closer. And again, I need a bigger slide. Why can't I plan ahead and get big slides? So in this case, that vanishing point is way outside of the picture frame. So now we're going to try something that's really complicated that uses 2-point linear perspective. Here's this girl. Why isn't anybody else on the subway? I'd be kind of nervous. There needs to be more people there. Okay, so first we're going to look for the corners. Now the corner's a little deceptive in this because they're small. So here's the corner here, and here's the corner there. And then the next thing we're going to look for is diagonal lines. So let's go along the length of the subway first. Start at the corner. Here's an existing line. Again, I am not making up crap here. I'm drawing on real lines and I'm extending them out. So we're going to draw and draw and draw along that diagonal line that goes from left to right, left to right, left. I'm going over the top of those benches. They look really clean. I've never seen a subway or light rail look that clean. Left to right, left to right. So those are going along the length of the subway. Now we're going to, they're going to some vanishing point way off the edge here. Now we're going to a second set of diagonal lines that run along the width of the subway. So they run along the top of this chair, bench, whatever, along the top and bottom of the chair. They're going off that way. There are these, I'm going to go back so you can see this more clearly. If you look at these seats, see these lines here? They're running along the width of those chairs. So we're going to draw along those lines. Width, width, width. They're all I got to do my lines crazy, but they're all going from right to left to some vanishing point that's way off the edge of the picture. The end. And once again, I hope you understand a little bit more about how to recognize 1- and 2-point linear perspective. I hope you have a good day.